G'day everybody, how you going today? It is so good to see you. I've been a little under the weather, still a little under the weather, but getting there. Today I want to talk about an exciting new rumour that's appeared on Nikon Rumours. Thank you to Nikon Rumours, and that is Z6 III. Nikon Rumours is stating that this is the first specs that they've actually received. Obviously you can jump onto YouTube and there's been speculation about the Z6 III probably for the last 2 years, because 2 years ago the Z6 II was 2 years old and the Z6 was released 2 years before that. So there was an assumption that the Z6 III, and even I was part of that, would come 2 years after the Z6 II. Wasn't the case, and what was the next most logical step is that Nikon would return to more of a 4-year cycle around these mid-level cameras. 4 years next year, the rumour is stating the first quarter of next year, which would make it a little bit early. It would make it more like 3.5 years. This is logical from my perspective. And this is something I wanted to talk about when it comes to rumours. This Z6 III rumour dropped, and someone said in my comments, are you a photographer or a fortune teller? And my first thought, my first reaction to that statement was, well, you know what? All of this sort of speculation that, and I love doing speculation because I'm a big nerd, to me it's actually just mathematics. It's actually crunching a whole lot of data points about technology, about the market, about potential, where could the spec go, as in where is this line of cameras going. It's all just a big mathematical algorithm. Once you crunch all those numbers, there's only actually a few variables that a Z6 III might be. And once we see these first rumoured Z6 III specs, then you can say to yourself, well, this absolutely fits within the calculations, which I call speculation, but they are actually calculations. And these are the same sort of calculations you do. For example, when I'm publishing a book, I will calculate how many I think I'm going to sell, because you have to choose, you know, am I going to make 3,000, 4,000, or 5,000 when I produce them? And you base that on a whole lot of hard data that you have access to, and then you throw in there a little bit of secret sauce. And that gets you a speculative number. You know, when I produced my first book, 10,000 copies, and this wasn't intended to be an ad, I only have 100 of those books left out of 10,000. If you want one, jump on the link below and grab one, because they're gone forever after that. That was based on calculations, and you have to make a decision of the more you produce, the lower the unit cost comes down, the less you produce, the higher it is, but the lower the risk. This is all numbers and data that ultimately you make a firm decision, a speculation on what you think you're going to sell. And I see this space as no different. We've got access to data, and then we ultimately speculate how realistic is this. So we have this first hard Z6 III rumour. It's full of data. We know where the market's at. We know where Nikon is at, as in what they've produced so far. The expectation is very, very high at this point in time that a Z6 III will be coming. So all of it makes sense. The timing is right, and pretty much everything else in this rumour is right from my perspective. So that is why I bother to make a video about it, because I've crunched the numbers and the speculation is pretty close to the just few variables that it could be. So let's talk about it. Firstly, 24 megapixel sensor. I've read in comments that Nikon said they'd never do that again. I don't know. I haven't read that, and I don't think any company is ever going to make definitive statements like that. It doesn't help them. And I know in my business, I'm never going to say, I'm never going to make another book. I just don't know. I really don't know what 3 years down the road is going to look like. But when it comes to sensor sizes, and I think this is it's a deeply interesting conversation around the fact that computer screens don't change resolution much. It's unlikely, it is unlikely that we would go beyond sitting in front of a 5K, 6K, maybe at very best 8K screens that we're sitting on our computers. But even that's unlikely. A lot of people are still on 1080, and I would say most people are sitting at 4K or 5K. That's where we're up to when it comes to computer screens. What is a constant that technology can never change? What is that single constant? And that is us. Our eyeballs are never going to become higher res. It's simply never going to happen. When it comes to resolution, this is one of these things that it's just going to reach a natural ceiling where it's like, we just don't need more. So the places that we can get more are things like dynamic range, speed of the sensor, or high ISO performance, 14-bit, 16-bit. These are some of the areas. Now, no camera company is ever going to do all of those areas at once. It's just simply not going to happen. So in the case of hearing that this is a 24 megapixel sensor and the Z6 was a 24 megapixel sensor, the Z6 II is a 24 megapixel sensor, the ZF is a 24 megapixel sensor, but it does say it's a new one. It says it's new. And that is so exciting because from my perspective, that's going to bring us one or some of those things I just talked about. This rumour suggests that there will still be a mechanical shutter, but also it will be able to shoot electronically. Most cameras are doing that today. The most recent one is the ZF. My guess is that 24 megapixel sensor, which is new, is going to have some advancements. And my guess is it's going to be a mix of higher ISO performance. This is just my guess. And this is based on mathematics of where is this camera aimed? Who's it aimed at? It's likely to be speed and higher ISO, and dynamic range will come third. That's from my perspective, if that happens. I do think we always see little minor tweaks. And the other thing that we're seeing happening here as processors are getting more powerful, the processors are actually doing a lot of work to mitigate some of those issues as well. So it's not just all the sensor that's bringing the improvements. How much faster? Hard to say. I definitely think it'll be faster than the ZF. I don't think it'll be as fast as a Z8 or a Z9. There's no mention of it being stacked. Now, rumours, of course, are rumours. And if this is a real rumour, as in it's really leaked, of course, the person that leaks it can cherry pick whatever they want to cherry pick at this point in time. I think things not being there, let's say mechanical shutter is mentioned, let's say BSI sensor is mentioned. Right now, it doesn't have to be mentioned that it's stacked. But look, to me, stacked versus just BSI only, that's a real line ball one. I think it can go either way. I think the fact that we're hearing it's got a mechanical shutter suggests to me it might not be stacked. But who knows? It also might be hybrid. It might be a mix of both. So that's super duper interesting to me. But it is new and it will be better than a Z6 II. That's my belief. And I think it will be an absolute consummate sort of low light, sports, wildlife, street, weddings, events, all that sort of stuff. It sounds like to me that's where it's aimed. And 24 is more than enough for those sort of areas. It's just such a great sweet spot. Video spec, 6K, which is super exciting to me because it allows you to punch in 50% on a 4K timeline. And that's really useful. I'm shooting this on the Z9. I can punch in up to 200% when shooting 8K. And it just means we've got a cut point without having to have two cameras. And when you're doing this stuff on your own, running two cameras is harder than running one camera. So it's better to chew more data shooting 8K, or in the case of the Z6 III, 6K, and jumping around with that one set of footage. It's just easier as a one-man show, and it's actually easier editing that as well. But there's also talk of ProRes RAW being a part of it, and I suspect that there will be a lot of the other codecs that we've seen in a Z8 and a Z9. I'd be surprised if we don't get Nikon's RAW codec as well, just running at 6K, or the native res of the sensor, not 8.3K. So very excited to hear about expanded video specs. Of course, it will include 10-bit because right now a Z6 II, it tops out at 8-bit. So my guess is it'll be basically similar to a Z8 and Z9. Instead of the 8K-ness, it'll be 6K-ness. Very exciting. Now, will that include open gate? I hope so. The recent firmware rumour, again, it's a rumour, is that the Z8 or Z9, probably both, will go to open gate. I do think open gate is a bit of a useful standard. It certainly helps with portrait video shooting, that you can shoot in this orientation, but you're getting more height, and that is useful. I would expect to see an in-body image stabilization unit the same as the ZF. Nikon will just keep giving us their best and as many stops as they can to give us the astonishing photography handheld, these long lenses, anything from about, I don't know, 24, even wider lenses, all the way up to around 200, maybe a bit further, can just be stabilized with these internal IBIS units. It's just amazing. And this is in the Z8, the Z9 and the ZF. They do have more powerful units than the Z6 II, Z7 II and the previous cameras. Part of that also leads to what is mentioned in the Rumour, which is pixel shift, and the fact that that gives us a 96 megapixel image in certain situations. Now, Sony's latest implementation of this takes into account, I think, a little bit of minor camera movement, and it also takes into account movement in the frame, and then it will remove a car that's moving across frames. Now, it doesn't do that in camera. There's some software that does that. Obviously, pixel shift is greatly appreciated, and whether Nikon give us the technology to remove objects in their post-processing software or even in camera, who knows? But there might be an advancement there. There might not. This sort of technology is not easy. I suppose if you put a team on it, then it's as easy as that. And at the end of the day, this is not something that Nikon can't do. It's just whether they've allocated resources to do it. Very exciting to see that there, and to have the capacity for your 24 megapixel camera to almost be 100 megapixels. This Rumour talks about a vari-angle screen. I think it's a rumour, and anything could be leaked, whether that's vari-angle that we see on a Z8 or a Z9, or whether that's sort of the Sony A7R5 style. It is widely agreed that that Sony A7R5 style screen just gives everybody the best of all worlds. Now, there's a few issues here, whether that's patented or not, don't know. And when you're creating something like this and you're making these mechanisms in the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, it will take a little bit of time for your supply chain to change. A manufacturer is just not going to dump parts that they've manufactured because they've decided there's something better. They will use the inventory that they've spent money on. Assuming there's no patent, and assuming Nikon want to do it, that they agree that this is a great style of screen. It's only been around a year or so in the Sony, if memory serves me correctly. I'm not sure that's long enough yet if they decided to do it. So I would put it 50-50 at best that we get that style of screen. Otherwise, I think it'll be a Z8 or a Z9 style of screen. It's still great. I'm very comfortable doing what I'm doing now, shooting without a screen, because I know how I'm framed. I check it. I know the AF is that good. You can add screens, you can add mirrors, and you can get 4 of the current Z cameras that do have flip around screens, which the ZF is a great option. But I genuinely think that as time passes, it should become a standard. I mean, there's other things that I think should be standards. For example, power buttons on cameras simply should never move. They should always be, from any manufacturer, they should always be in the same spot. And I am deeply surprised to see that one manufacturer moves their power button around, and it's something I don't understand. I haven't had to contend with it most of the time. Obviously, I use other brands of cameras, but I think my Sonys are in the same place, which is under the trigger. My Fujis are in the same place, which is under the trigger. My Hasselblad is not. It's somewhere else, but that's a very unique camera in itself. Not designed for speed, might I add. I just think the industry needs some standards, and that style of screen that Sony have implemented, I think first, let me know in the comments if someone else did it before them. And the only mathematical crunching that I'd want to do around that screen is it weaker? Is it more likely to break? And I don't know. They look pretty good to me in the times that I've spent with it. This Rumour states that it's going to have better ergonomics than the Z6 II, similar ergonomics to the Z8, and going to be somewhere in between the two of these cameras. Well, that makes perfect sense to me. I have large hands. This camera is the right size for me. This camera is actually a little bit small. So I would love to see something in between. From my perspective, the difference is kind of in weight and size when it comes to kind of walking around the world, something like a 200-gram difference, and the size difference. It just doesn't factor into me, because the type of shooting that I do, whether it's commercial or for myself, is usually about holding cameras for extended periods of time. My muscles can get stronger, but my hand cannot get smaller. So ergonomics to me trumps size and weight in the sense of I would prefer to have comfortable hands and the camera be slightly heavier and slightly larger than having uncomfortable hands and saving a little bit. So that's me. Now, we're all different. And of course, people with smaller hands, well, they don't even have to worry about what I just talked about. A completely subjective thing, but the Rumour is somewhere in between the two, and that's perfectly logical to me. Now, the Rumour doesn't talk about card slots, but if we look at the Z6 II and we look at the Z8, they've got CF Express Type B and they've got SD. They've both got the same configuration. Mathematically speaking, it's highly likely that it'll be exactly the same configuration. End of story. The only difference, there's a very good chance, although the camera just simply may not require it, so why bother? And it would really just be to future-proof it, is that it has the CF Express Type B version 4. So it's even faster. These cards have a theoretical maximum limit of 4 gigabytes per second. Now, it's a really hard one for me. I really get why SD is still in cameras, because just SD is everywhere and people have lots of SD cards and they're easy to buy and it's flexible and it's all that, all of those reasons. There's just a lot of reasons why it's a great idea, but personally, I don't really like SD. I really prefer the robustness of CF Express. I've never had a failure in that time, not one. And XQD, which came before it from 2012, so it's a decade old, I've never had a failure. I have had SD failures, not a lot, but they just kind of seem to wear out over time and just handling. I don't think anything catastrophic. I don't think I've ever lost any work, but it was just like you stick it in the camera and that card's not working anymore. That simply hasn't happened to me with the XQD CF Express Type B format, which is why I would be happy to have just one card, like we do with the Z9, and then that's all you've got to think about. That doesn't take into account the ease of use and the fact that you can buy SD cards anywhere and all that sort of stuff. I don't think anytime soon SD will stop being a card, just simply because of how ubiquitous, how everywhere it is. From a cost perspective, CF Express Type B has become so competitive, and some people complain or are worried about some of the Chinese brands, etc. I've been mostly using those brands for years now, and I just haven't had any problems. They're used by Red, Fuji, Canon, and even Sony are using them in their new Burano camera. And I think Panasonic as well, plus Nikon. So there's wide adoption of Type B. It's a great format, but I don't think it'll change in the Z6 III. This Rumour mentions that there will be higher frame rates. Well, that kind of goes without saying from my perspective. The fact that the Rumour says we have mechanical and electronic shutter usage probably means it can do something like the ZF, which is have these high frame rates in electronic mode. That could go up to any real speed. It just depends on the speed of the sensor, which I'm guessing will be faster than the ZF sensor. So who knows what that might mean? I don't think it'll be Z8, Z9 levels, but I do think it'll be more than the ZF. So somewhere in the middle, as usual. I mean, it makes perfect sense. This camera will be, say, $500 more than a ZF. It'll be halfway between the Z8 and the ZF, roughly technology-wise. So think, again, mathematically, what do we get halfway between the two? Mechanical shutter-wise, I think 16 frames a second, somewhere around there is the fastest we've seen with physical mechanical shutters, which is very fast. Currently, the Z6 II shoots at 14 frames. It's moving its shutter at 14 frames. So mechanical, we might not see much more of an increase. And I think it'll be more on the electronic side if it's there. So there it is, the Z6 III Rumour. As I said at the opening, suggested to be arriving first quarter, which is January, February, March. So that's very close. There are a number of trade shows and so on going on in January and February. Lots of opportunity for this camera to be launched. Highly anticipated by the YouTube space. Again, to go back to the mathematics, it certainly makes sense. We will be in the 4th year since the Z6 III was released. I look upon these specs, and if you think about it, the 24 megapixel sensor, some people, including myself, speculated it might be higher, but it doesn't really need to be. As I said when the A7 IV came out. The actual difference in pixel count between 24 megapixels and 33 megapixels is only 1,000 pixels. It's about 6,000 versus 7,000. To jump and add another, you add 9 million pixels and you only get 1,000 on the long edge. The maths is correct. It's hard to believe. I think it makes sense, and I think all of the trade-offs for low light performance, maybe dynamic range, and speed of the sensor, I think all of these things are worth it. And again, at the market that it's aimed at, why not? We really don't need any more. I can easily remember in 2007, when my D3 came out and I had a full frame 12 megapixel camera, blew my mind, best thing ever, and those files still look good today, those 12 megapixel files. When it comes to resolution, and this is also true for when it comes to higher ISOs, this is now becoming less and less of an issue as we have AI enhancement. For example, the AI enlargements, whether it's Topaz or Photoshop's version of it, where you can double the size of your file. So if you get a file that's absolutely astonishing, but you wish you shot it on your Z8 or your Z7, but you didn't, this is not going to be the case in 100% of circumstances, but it is going to be the case in many circumstances that it's not going to be a problem because you can just enlarge it at no image quality cost. And even higher ISO, the AI noise reduction algorithm in Photoshop is just so impressive that high ISOs like 3200, 6400, I'll make a video about it. You can use this noise reduction and it pretty much looks like you're shooting at base ISO. It's astonishing stuff. So unless you're going to go to 45, you have a pretty big step. I don't see the point of, and this is again, crunching the numbers, I don't see the point of 6,000 to 7,000 pixels when you can easily make that up so many different ways. And of course, in the case of this Rumour, they're talking about pixel shift. It's really interesting stuff to me. I love crunching the data. And that becomes the speculation. That's what it's all about to me. I'd love to know what your data crunching is. What is your speculation in the space around the Z6 III? Do these rumoured specs seem credible enough to you? It's been so good to see you. If this is your first time here, I would love to see you again. So please do subscribe, please share, and please like. All right, bye for now. And I hope I get better soon. This is taking forever.